All right, just want to welcome everyone to another episode of RG22 Outdoor Adventures, and I think today I'm gonna make some floats. I'm not gonna turn them out of wood. I've turned them out of wood before, which you guys have already seen. But I've wanted to do this for a long time. I've been trying to figure out how to do it, and I've seen a lot of different videos on lure making where they use silicone molds. They make the master, and then they make a clay mold from that, and then they do the silicone. So that's what I did today. That's what I'm doing today. And I've already made a mold out of silicone because I've been working on this for a while before I did the video and wanted to make sure I get this technique down before I show it to everybody. So I took one of my floats that you guys saw the batch of floats I made in a previous video. So I actually made a mold of one of those floats. Now, so what I decided to do is I wanted to try something other than wood to see how this would work. I did. I bought some foam from Alumilite, so here it is right here for you guys to see. Right there, Alumilite Super Foam 320. They make two different ones. This one really expands. It just expands. It explodes when it expands. So I experimented with some carbon fiber stems and made some floats out of these, and I think these are going to work awesome. But I've been trying to find ways to make it a little bit more rigid and more friendly to paint. So I then started using this resin right here, which sets really quick. It's more of a casting resin. It turns white when it's fully cured, or when it hardens, and it takes a little while for it to become fully cured. And I started experimenting with some micro balloons mixed in with the resin to hopefully maybe add a little bit more buoyancy to the float. But I have yet to try these, but I think they're going to work really good. So hopefully we can do this on another video, or on this video actually, or later on in the video. So let's get started with this, and I'll explain everything as I go. All right, so after this mold is completed, now I want to start figuring out what I want to use for a stem. Now, there's a bunch of different materials you could use. You could use stainless steel wire, you could use aluminum, you could use carbon fiber, fiberglass stems, um, wood, bamboo, anything like that is suitable for using for a stem for the float. In this particular On this particular float, I'm choosing to use the carbon fiber, but I think each stem like kind of yields to its own type of characteristic and how the float will behave in the water as it tracks and whatnot. I think the metal is a little bit more stable. The graphite, you can go thinner, and it's quite dense as well. And I think it really aids in balancing the float quite well. So let's get started, and let's start making this float, and I'll start explaining how it's made after in the next few slides. Okay, so after I've got I chose the stem, the carbon fiber. I brought this. I took the form out that I made, the mold, out of silicone, and I've got it. I sprayed some silicone sealer over, release agent over it, and I'm gonna start making the body. Now I did a few different things before I did all this, and the very first time I used the two parts foam. It's a liquid, and then after it all catalyzes, it then turns into a foam. And I used that at first, and it really wasn't very um, painter friendly. So it made it really difficult to paint. It didn't come out smooth. And then if you put anything on it, like a seal, like a clear coat, it kind of the foam would kind of just like kind of shrivel up. So I tried finding different ways to do this. First, one way I took a two-part resin, a casting resin, and I mixed it in with the foam. It came out really nice, nice and solid, sturdy, but it looked like Swiss cheese, and I really didn't like it all that well. So I thought about there's got to be a different way to make like a paintable skin over the float. So I took this two-part resin, made a few trials, and painted it on really nice on the inside part of that mold, and tried to make a skin, and then used the foam. It foamed up. It had a nice little skin, but it still needed some refining. So I kept experimenting and came up to the part where I started using micro balloons, and that you saw in the very beginning of the video, and I would mix that together and almost let it get to a point where it starts to catalyze. At that point, I kind of started painting it onto the on that inside part of the mold, and I'd let it harden up a little bit. At that point, I then placed the stem in, closed the mold up, mixed the foam, and then poured the foam in, and you would just let it expand. And probably after maybe a half an hour, I think the longer you let it sit, the better the better the outcome you'd have with this with the float and everything. So doing that really came out with some really nice floats. So that's kind of what I'm going to do here in this video in this part of the video. I've got it all done. I've got the mold. I've got the resin mixed up. Put the micro balloons in, and basically I'm just gonna paint it on. I want to try to fill up the very front of the float, which would be the antenna, the top of it, and I wanted to try to make that as solid as I possibly could. Um, and then after it starts to set and cure, that's when I put the stem in. I close it up. I mix the foam. It's a two part. It's a 1-to-1 mix. It has like almost a 20 time. It expands like 20 times its total volume. So you don't need a lot. Maybe 5 cc's of each, and you pour it in, and you pour it into the mold. Kind of swish it around a little bit, and then within probably, I'd have to say maybe 10 seconds after you're done mixing it, it immediately starts foaming up, and it has a demold time of about 15 minutes, but I like letting it sit a little bit longer so that way it has a really good chance to cure and set. So enjoy. So that's what I'm doing in this part of the video here. I'm just kind of just getting this stuff all set up on the mold. So I've got the resin already painted on the mold. The mold's closed up. The stem is in, and this is where I'm going to start mixing the part A and part B of this Alumilite Superfoam 320, which it's a fairly light foam. It's not very heavy like the other one. There's another foam they make that's kind of heavy, but this one's pretty light. You don't need a whole lot. I think I put in maybe 5 cc's of each. And again, just like the two-part resins that I've been using and that the majority of other people use, this is another one that can be mixed either using volume or weight if you use a scale. If it's 1-to-1, you should be good to go. Anyways, you mix it for about 45 seconds, and then you have probably, after that's mixed, I would probably say maybe 10 seconds a time to actually pour it into the mold. So you got to work really fast. And what I like to do is I kind of like to slosh it around the mold to get all the edges in the mold covered, and that way it allows the foam to expand equally throughout the entire mold. And then you'll see in just a few seconds this mold's just going to boil up over through the fill hole, and then give it about 30 minutes, and then we'll be back to demold it. Well, 30 minutes has passed, and it's time to start demolding this. As you can see, that was what was left in the cup, so you can really see how well this foam expanded. And we're going to take it off. We're going to break the top off, and then we're going to take the rubber bands off the mold, and we're going to take the wood off. The wood was just providing some support on the mold. And ever so slowly, we're going to take this mold apart, and we're going to reveal what this float looks like. And I'm anticipating it's going to look really good. It's going to have a nice white shell to it. And then after that, we take all the flashing and all of what you can see, all the little vent holes and where we poured the finish into, or the foam. And we're going to take that off too. And after that, it's kind of filling in some of those holes and getting that nice and even, sanding it smooth. And then we're getting ready to paint it. Actually, first, before we paint it, I put another coat of clear over it, so it provides a nice smooth surface for the paint to go onto. Well, now that I've got the float basically done, I went ahead and put a clear coat over it using 30-minute epoxy, and then I sanded it smooth and then filled in some of the holes with some super glue and baking soda and did some more finish sanding. And in a moment, I'm going to go over all of the colors of the paint that we're going to use for this float. So let's get into some of the colors we're going to be using on this float. So right now we're going to be using an opaque white for the primer. Moving on to a what was it? Gold. So over the primer is going to be gold. That's going to go up the entire float. From there, we're going to move on to, if I remember correctly, it was a pearl lime green, wicked pearl lime green. And that's going to be sprayed maybe halfway up with some overspray on the gold, maybe 3/4 of the way. Like I said, with some overspray on the gold. Then we're going to move over to a pearl green. That's going to be sprayed over the pearl lime, maybe roughly halfway up the float with some overspray on the wicked pearl lime green. And then moving on to the transparent black, which will be at the very bottom, and it's just going to have some overspray going onto all of the other colors. Now there's two accent colors that I'm going to be painting on this float, and the first one's going to be fluorescent yellow topped off with fluorescent orange. And when all that is done, there's going to be a black accent line that's going to separate the colors between the colors on the body of the float and then the two accent colors that we're putting up. So, and then from there after that, it's clear coat, let it set and dry, and then we're done. So let's get on to painting, and then I'll show you guys all the colors and how it's painted. All right, so this is the base coat of opaque white. And then, so we're going to spray the entire float, multiple light coats. I think I probably did maybe 4 or 5 coats of this and letting it dry in between. So after that, after the opaque white, which is our primer base coat, we move on to the next color, which is going to be gold. So for a long time, I wanted to try making clean, crisp lines when I was separating the colors on the floats. At one time, I was just using a natural wood color when I was making them out of balsa wood, and then I wanted a really nice, crisp line that separated the visual part of the float out of the water versus the rest of the body. And I didn't want, because I was using spray paint, and I didn't want to worry about overspray. Tape didn't cut it because you had to use different. It wouldn't just conform with the shape and the contour of the float. So I found out that I tried Teflon tape, which is what plumbers use for plumbing, and I found out that this Teflon tape really did a really good job at giving me that really clean, crisp line, with allowing for a lot of overspray. So I didn't really have to worry about um, the rest of the body being extremely neat when I painted it. Had the overspray. When you take that Teflon tape off, the overspray was gone, and you had a nice clean float. So that's what I did here. And then after that, when that was all done, then I actually started painting the body of the float, and you'll see the main color is going to be, the first color I'm using is going to be a gold ink that you've seen on many other videos I've done. And like I said, I got that Teflon tape on the part that's going to be seen out of the water with the fluorescent green and orange. And I don't even worry about the overspray. I just spray the paint. Don't worry about it when it's all done. It comes off, and I've got a nice, clean, crisp line, and it's all clean for the rest of the painting. So yellow, so gold ink is next. Well, all right, so let's move on to the gold ink. This is a gold ink that I'm using that's going to be the base color that's going to go on before we put on the Wicked Lime, the Wicked Pearl Lime Green, and then the Pearl Green, and then the Transparent Black. So this is the first color that's going over our base coat of white. So this is really, I'm getting really excited. As you can see, I have the Teflon tape trick that I used, and I'm not even worried about overspray right now. I just don't really care. The Teflon tape's going to keep all that from happening, and you're going to see when it's all off, we have a nice crisp line ready for the rest of the painting of the float. And then at the end, you can actually see what this looks like up close. I think this first coat came out really nice. I like how these inks lay up on the on the lures and the floats that I make, and it's something I've been using for a long time. So here's what it looks like at the end of the gold painting. And let's move on to the next color. Okay, so this next color in the sequence is going to be Wicked Pearl Lime Green. And I know you guys have already seen videos of me painting floats already and the shading, so you know how I do it. So you know I'm going to start fairly far away and at a really low angle. And then I'm just going to move the airbrush up the float, allowing that overspray that you're going to see to go almost all the way up to the curve where you see that Teflon tape. But the primary color is going to be within the first, pretty close to 3/4 of the body of the float. Um, and it's just basic. We just move. It's just small layers and just layering that pearl lime green all the way up the float. As you can kind of see what I'm kind of alluding to in the video here. Um, and each color is going to be done in the same exact way, but not as far up. I'm going to allow the overspray to go into those next colors. So I'm allowing the overspray from the Wicked Pearl Lime Green to actually go all the way up to into that gold. And then at the end here, you'll see this is what it looks like at the very end. You can see that the colors, that Wicked Pearl Lime Green goes all the way up to the top with the overspray, and it looks really cool with the shading. So let's move on to the next color, and that next color is going to be Pearl Green. All right, so this next color is going to be Lime Green, and basically, as you can see, the color, the shading and how the technique is exactly the same. The only difference is I'm holding the airbrush just a little bit further away and still moving the airbrush from the bottom of the float to the top. Or if you're looking at it from at the perspective of the painter, so I guess it would be from top to bottom. But the stem I consider the bottom of the float. So from bottom to top. And I'm allowing that overspray to then go over the pearl lime green, and then also encroaching into that final gold color that we did as our very first color. And then, as you can see at the end of the painting, you can see how that green and that overspray just kind of just goes over the pearl lime green and then over that gold, and you can see that really nice shading effect that it's going to have. And I really like doing it this way. I just think the effects are really cool. All right, so this is the final color for the body of the float. It's a transparent black, starting very heavy at the bottom, because that's primarily where this color is going to be, and then just spraying all the way up to the top and allowing that overspray to go almost just barely into the gold. and it just gives it a really cool final shading effect for the paint, and it just gives it really awesome contrast. And when I let, and from there we take the Teflon tape off. You're going to see that nice crisp line, and then from there we're going to do the fluorescent yellow, and then on top of that the fluorescent orange. So stay tuned and let's check those colors out shortly. Basically, what I'm doing at this point is optional. You don't really have to do this if you don't want to, but I'm painting a extra color. It's going to be a fluorescent yellow, and or chartreuse, and basically, the I think what the principle of this color is that when you weight the float down to the orange, so the orange part of the float is basically the only part of the float that's out of the water. The rest is underneath the water and adding, it's like a ballast. So basically, and it's adding buoyancy and whatnot to the float. Basically, what happens is if the fish is going to hit and it hits, and it, as it's coming up from the bottom and it pushes the float up, you're going to see that orange or the fluorescent yellow come up out of the water. And I believe that's one of the reasons for it. But it's optional. You don't really need to do it. You can just, if you just want to do plain orange, you could do plain orange. If you want to do plain chartreuse or whatever fluorescent color you want that you can see easily from a distance, you could use. And then from there, after that color is done, as you'll see at the very end, we move on to the fluorescent orange. And then we add a neck. We take off the Teflon tape at the body of the float, add a contrast of black, and then from there it's clear finish, and after that we use the float. So let's move on to the fluorescent orange. We're finally nearing the very end of this float. We're almost done. And this is good. I'm really excited. I think this float's really coming out really nice. Being that this is the first time I've done anything like this with the that hard casting resin shell that I used, that encases the foam. So I'm really excited about how all this has turned out so far, and I'm really excited to see how this is going to actually work in the water, because it really does have that same feel as a balsa wood float. At least in my opinion, it does. All the ones I've made. So basically, what I'm doing now is it is the final paint, the final color, the fluorescent orange, that's going to go on to the tip of the float. And like I've done every other time, it's been multiple light coats, and you just kind of build from there. And the color just gets deeper and richer as you add more and more coats onto it. But you obviously don't want to overdo it, because sometimes too much of something like that it gets bad. So anyways, let's let's get this finished. And then that Teflon tape that you see at the body of the float is all going to come off. And after that, we're going to paint a black, I used opaque black with a brush, and going to paint an accent line that's going to just separate the body of the float from the colored portion of the float that's going to be either A, sitting out of the water, or B, sitting in the water. It's just going to separate those two parts of the float. And then when all that is done and the paint is dry, you've already seen me do multiple coats of finish. So I'm going to put at least one or two coats of a clear epoxy over it. I'm going to let that cure overnight, and then after that the float is done, and we can fish with it. So the next step is the clear coat and then fishing. This is really exciting because I'm almost done with this float. I'm getting ready to mix the two-part epoxy. It's a one-to-one mixture. You can, like I said before in many other videos, you could either do it by weight or you could do it by volume. I have a scale, so I've been doing this by weight, and I have not had any issues with any problems with the finish curing at all. Um, the one tip I will give, and I've given out a few other times, is the more finish you use of both, equal parts, obviously, you have a greater you have more room for error. It's more forgiving, and it allows and you don't have to be exact. You could be maybe 1 cc plus or minus of either one if you're using like 10 cc's of part A and you accidentally use 11 cc's of part B or vice versa. You're pretty much okay, and I don't think you're going to have any issues. I haven't had any problems with it, but typically I use um, more part B than anything because sometimes it's just how it comes out when I'm pouring it out. All right, so after the two parts are poured, it's time to mix them together. And this is something you don't really want to rush because obviously, if this is your final coat, you want to try to keep as minimal amount of air bubbles as possible. You can either fold it over, or there's a weight with there's a mixer you could use, or you could stir it, but you stir it nice and slow, and you take your time on it. So after we're done with the stirring, we get this float over to the rotisserie, and I'm going to start applying the epoxy. And I do it in fairly heavy coats. Typically, it's just one coat. I do it fairly heavy. Paint it all. Use a brush, paint it all around. Let it drip dry for a little while. And when it looks like it's pretty much done dripping, put it on a rotisserie and let it rotate for the next probably 24 hours overnight usually. So with that said, I just want to thank everybody for watching the video. If you like it, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons, and then there's a little bell you could hit. Also, I'd love to hear your guys' input on some of this stuff and anything that you guys would like to see on a video. Please put stuff down in the comments on any video I have. I'd really appreciate it. And I interact with everybody, and I usually try to, I typically respond to 100% of the posts, whether they're good or bad. I'll respond to it. Also, I want to thank all of my subscribers, new viewers, and without any of you guys, these videos wouldn't be possible. I do this as a hobby. I have a full-time job, and I put videos out when I can. So just be patient. Videos will be coming out, and that's about it. So again, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. And I hope you all have a great day. Take it easy.